So hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here at the Dhahatuna Kuti and thought to record a short Awada for the internet. So I thought that could start with a little meditation, so you can lean forward a bit and arch the spine and look about 3 feet in front and close our eyes. And so can lean forward a bit and arch the spine and look about 3 feet in front and close our eyes. And can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, wishing may all beings to my right be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond, in every dimension. May all beings to my right be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side and our left hand side, wishing may all beings to my right and my left be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, to our left hand side, and in front, wishing may all beings to my right, my left, and in front be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, our left hand side, in front and behind, wishing may all beings in all 4 directions be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, to our left hand side, in front, behind, and above. May all beings in all 4 directions and above be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, our left hand side, in front, behind, above, below, all around in every direction everywhere. May all beings all around in every direction everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond, in every dimension. May all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. And before we finish meditating, can contemplate impermanence, how all phenomena that are subject to arising are subject to ceasing. They're not me, not mine, not myself. Okay, and can open our eyes and do a short Awada for the internet. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So I hope that everybody's having a great day wherever it might be. And we just had rainstorm yesterday and early this morning. The rainy season sometimes comes a bit later, or the actual rainy season tends to start maybe, I guess, October, late October, and then ends in January in Sri Lanka. The official one, according to the Buddhist calendar, starts in July. And so it's interesting, there's this aspect to the Buddha's teachings of balancing different qualities. So when he first started to teach, he taught that his path was a middle path between what they call kind of indulgence in sensuality, what they call indulgence in self-mortification or self-torture. And so the middle path between these two things is what he laid out as the Noble Eightfold Path. And this Noble Eightfold Path is something that differs a bit for everybody. It has all the factors of the path, of course, the kind of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right effort, right livelihood, right mindfulness, right concentration. But as far as the different ways that people cultivate these, and the different strengths, the different combinations to which they cultivate each one, these differ among people. In the Buddha's teachings, he laid down these set of practices called Ascetic Practices, or dhutangas, these kind of 13 dhutangas. These are things which are allowable ascetic practices for Buddhist monks. And they're things like eating only one meal a day, going on alms round, they say every day, and then there's a bunch around alms round. It's like going to every house. I can't remember all of them. One of them is not accepting meal offerings that people bring to the monastery, basically just only eating pindapat food. Another one is not lying down to sleep. Another one is living in the forest. Another one is living at the root of a tree. Another one's living in the open air. I can't remember, I think living in a cemetery might be one too. I'm not 100% sure. But these extra practices, these dhutangas, are the Buddha's allowance and his recommendation to a certain extent for asceticism in his teachings. Beyond that, what we have as far as the monks for monastics, what stops them, or what you might call the restraining aspect of the Buddhist teachings. We have the kind of the Dhamma, or the aspects about what to do, and then we have this restraining aspect about what not to do. And so there's also this balance, this middleness between what a bhikkhu shouldn't do and what he should do. How a bhikkhu should behave and how he shouldn't behave. So as far as the rest of that, what one has as a monk is the Vinaya. It's kind of the Buddha's rules that he lays down about basically lines that a monk shouldn't cross at all. And he even lays them down so strongly, he kind of says that a monk shouldn't, that even as the ocean is stable, it doesn't overstep its bounds, so too disciples of the Buddha don't break the Vinaya even for the sake of their life. There's actually stories in the Vinaya Pitaka, or at least one story I can remember, where a monk, I think at the time, the monks carried water strainers. And I'm not sure about the exact rulings at the time. Sometimes these rules went through permutations. But one monk criticized another monk while they were walking along a road, and then that monk developed a grudge against him. And then the first monk, the one who was criticizing, he needed water. He was very thirsty, and he didn't have a water strainer, which monks would typically use to stop from killing living beings. And so he asked that monk who he'd been criticizing for his water strainer so he could drink some water. And the monk refused, and he died. He died as a result of not getting enough water. And so that shows the serious. When one reads through the rules in the Vinaya Pitaka in the Buddha's time, the monks at his time were very scrupulous, very serious about keeping them. And if they were unsure about something, they would just often refuse to do it, in which case the Buddha would often lay down an allowance which allowed them to do it. So I allow you to do this, I allow you to do that, when the monks were very scrupulous and didn't want. So as far as this portion of the Buddha's teachings on asceticism, on what you might call the difficult practices, the kind of the dhutanga practices, these are the things that we have more or less. We have the dhutangas themselves, we have the Vinaya Pitaka, about the lines that one should and shouldn't cross. Within that, from the Vinaya Pitaka to what we might call the Dhamma side, there's this range of possibilities for where monks can live their lives. What we have in the Vinaya Pitaka is the Buddha laying down, in the Sutta Pitaka, and also I think in the Vinayas, where the Buddha laying down that basically one of the conditions of non-decline is that if monks don't try to make the Vinaya more strict than it is, and they don't try to make it less strict than it is. They basically follow the Vinaya as it's been written, follow the Vinaya as it's been laid down. And so from that, what we have is this system where basically one doesn't try to alter the Buddha's teachings, one doesn't try to change what he's written down in the Vinaya, one doesn't try to step beyond them, but also one can take on, if one likes, extra practices that one feels are convenient, that don't violate the Vinaya, that don't violate the principles laid down in the Dhamma, because the Buddha criticized this self-mortification very harshly. In ancient India, they had many, and even in modern India, apparently, they had many of these ascetics, people who would go through great lengths and put themselves through great difficulty. So there was once heard a story by Ajahn Jayasaro about he had, or about Ajahn Jayasaro, I can't remember who told it, maybe it was him himself. And he at one time kept the sitter's practice, his practice of not laying down to sleep for 4 years. And then he went to India, he went on tudong, or wandering, with Ajahn Pasano, I think, and they were wandering. And he came to this one place and he met a Hindu ascetic. He'd been keeping only 2 postures for 10 years. That is, walking and standing. He didn't sit or lie down. He kind of leaned against this hammock when he went to sleep. And so, as far as these kind of very strict, rigorous practices, these are very much alive in India, or were very much alive in India, and much, much more difficult, much, much more painful than what the Buddha recommended, what he kind of allowed. And so even there's a religion, Jainism, which is very difficult, very painful. And the Buddha criticized these difficulties and this pain to a certain extent. However, one of the things that's interesting is that these difficult and painful practices can seem very impressive, can seem very attractive when one hears about them. So it's always recommended that, like at least in the forest tradition by people who take these practices on, the recommendation is that one has to take on the dhutanga practices with an attitude of observing to see if they're actually beneficial for one's practice, observing to see if they help one. So I was chatting with a monk the other day, and in the Thai forest tradition, there's this kind of, it seems there's this pattern. People who like to reduce their food a lot or take on practices related to reducing food don't like to take on practices related to reducing sleep. And people like to take on practices related to reducing sleep, tend to, not 100%, don't tend to find as much benefit with the practices related to reducing food. So there's these differences in character for these things, and one needs to observe them closely to see which ones are beneficial and which ones aren't. But there's always this kind of thing with the dhutanga practices in that they can become something, or difficult practices, practices that look painful, practices that look hard and arduous, that they can become something, the danger of them, where people think that this is the only way to practice. People think that if one isn't taking them on to a certain degree, then one isn't practicing properly. So there's this story from the time of the Buddha where the Buddha's cousin, Devadatta, he decided he wanted to become the leader of the Sangha, the ruler of the Sangha, and he wanted to split the Sangha. So he tried to kill the Buddha, and he also eventually tried to split the Sangha. I think this was actually after he tried to kill the Buddha. He went to the Buddha, and he said it would be good if the Lord basically agreed to these 5 points. And they were all 5 points related to strictness in ascetic practices, basically. It's more or less that monks should be vegetarian, that they shouldn't use a dwelling, that they should only dwell at the roots of trees, and I can't remember the other ones. I think there were 5, but they were all related to being stricter. And the Buddha rejected all of them. He said, I allow people to eat meat if it hasn't been seen, heard, or suspected that it's been killed for them. I allow them to live at the root of the trees for 9 months of the year. And let those who want to live in a village live in a village. Let those who want to live in a city or in a forest live in a forest. And there was, I can't remember the other 2 now. In any event, as a result of this, Devadatta went and announced to people that the Buddha was very slack and that he was more strict. And some people agreed with Devadatta. And interestingly enough, a lot of young monks, those who were newly gone forth, they left and joined Devadatta because they thought the Buddha wasn't strict enough. As it ended, Sariputta and Mahamoggallana, they went and were able to teach these monks the true Dhamma and bring them back. So this is one of the dangers of asceticism. Asceticism has its benefits. Asceticism has its place and its role in the Buddha's teachings. But one of the dangers is that when it becomes a kind of thing that is used to, that people see as essential, that people see in black and white terms as this is the only way that people can practice for the attainment of Nibbana. And people see, if one sees that or thinks that, if a monk is practicing really austerely, then it must mean that he's making progress. And if a monk isn't taking on the same level of dhutangas, the same number of dhutangas, or even extra practices that aren't in the dhutangas, then it's not possible, or they're definitely not making enough progress. And so I remember when I was a young monk, I went to stay at a monastery in Thailand, and the dhutangas there are very strict, and it's excellent, and was very inspired and very impressed. And I took on a lot and took on too many. And actually what ended up happening was I took on that practice of not sitting, or not lying down to sleep. And I went out to stay in the forest, and I slept on this kind of incline, but sitting up. And because I was not sleeping much, I kind of fell asleep very deeply, and I ended up hurting my neck, and gave me kind of neck issues that trouble me. So that was what happened as a result of this, taking on this dhutanga unwisely, taking it on in not proper proportion, not observing its effects on my practice. And so although these things, these dhutangas, they tend to, as in the case of Devadatta, they tend to inspire respect, they inspire faith, even in, of course, monks. Monks tend to emphasize them quite a lot because the danger tends to be going too slack rather than going too hard. But there is also this danger in going too hard. This danger in going too hard that one can injure oneself. A danger in going too hard that one can take on practices that are what the Buddha calls self-torture. These things actually there may be practices that the Buddha hasn't even laid down that one might take on. If one decides to only take on one posture and only stand, then this is something that the Buddha would likely classify as self-torture. Not beneficial, although difficult. And so there's another sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya where there's a monk, or the Buddha comes to a layman's house, and he says to the layman, "Do you give gifts? Do you give gifts, layman?" I can't remember the layman's name. And he says, "Yes, I give gifts. My gifts are given to the monks who are arahants." This is those who are triple rag robe wearers. That's another one. One wears robes made of triple rags, who are alms food goers. I can't remember, he probably said forest dwellers, all these dhutangas that are laid down by the Buddha. And the Buddha says, it would be difficult for you, householder, to know, living mired in sensual pleasures, to know who isn't and who is and who isn't an arahant. And he says, if a bhikkhu lives in the forest and he's basically not muddle-minded, he has kind of good sati, he has good concentration, he's cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path, then in that way, basically, just paraphrasing the sutta here, I can't remember the exact words the Buddha used, but paraphrasing the principles, in that way he's basically on the path towards arahantship. And if a bhikkhu lives in the forest and he's muddle-minded, he's unconcentrated, loose in his talk, talking a lot, doing all these different things, then in that way he's blameworthy, more or less. And if a bhikkhu lives in a city and he's concentrated, he's mindful, all these various things, in that way he's kind of worthy of praise. So then he says to the layman, give gifts to the entire Sangha. Giving gifts to the entire Sangha, basically with the Sangha in mind, all the bhikkhus of the four quarters, present and to come, and also bhikkhunis, then your mind will be at ease. Your mind will be happy, and with your mind happy and at ease, you'll go to heaven. So in other words, one in one's own practice needs to find an appropriate balance for what they might call the dhutangas, for what they might call asceticism in Buddhism. Asceticism in Buddhism is regulated by, his recommendations for it are the dhutangas, these 13 dhutangas. His recommendations on what not to do, what we might call not recommendations, but basically the law code, the rules on what one shouldn't do, are contained in the Vinaya. These are basically lines that a bhikkhu shouldn't cross. And this is the Buddha's laying down for the balance between the extremes of sensual indulgence, between the extremes of self-mortification. His balancing for the self-mortification side are more or less the Vinaya Pitaka and the dhutangas, these dhutangavatas. It's here that we can see his wisdom in teaching us what not to do, and what austerities to take them on, and how to take them on. So practicing in the way that he recommended, following austerities to eliminate sensual pleasure, is something excellent. But also one needs to be careful to keep in mind their appropriate role, their appropriate balance, and their appropriate purpose, which is the lessening of defilements in one's own mind, which is the reduction of wants, which is for living a life at ease. And one also needs to keep in mind the dangers of asceticism, the dangers of ascetic life, and that these are things that, if they're not viewed properly, if they're not taken on properly, can lead to wrong views, such that only if a monk is practicing really strictly, with a lot of self-denial, is he making progress or able to make progress. only if a layperson is practicing with a lot of self-denial are they able to make progress. The lines for the amount of self-denial that one shouldn't cross are in the rules laid down by the Buddha, the precepts laid down by the Buddha. Beyond that, it's one's own individual characteristics that determine whether they're beneficial or not. So the Buddha recommended that one doesn't basically take on this attitude that if a monk, just because he's a forest dweller, just because he's a triple rag robe wearer, just because he's an alms food eater, that necessarily means he's an arahant. This is something that's very difficult to tell. And that one should basically develop an attitude of respect for the entire Sangha. That one should develop an attitude of reverence for the entire Sangha, for the Sangha as a whole. Because it's not so easy to tell which path one will need to take. These paths that we take are individual. There was this there was this phrase that came actually from the Chinese Communist Party by Deng Xiaoping, that one needs to cross the river by feeling the stones. So in other words, one's path forward in the Dhamma is not something that one can pre-plan, not something that one can say that I'll just take on the maximum number of strict practices that I can, and that will necessarily be the way forward. One needs to move forward by crossing the river, feeling the stones, seeing, is this practice good for me, is it bad for me, is this practice beneficial, is it not beneficial? And in this way one can move forward. It may or may not be a way with the maximum number of austere practices, but it will be a way, ideally the Buddha says, that doesn't cross the Vinaya, doesn't cross the lines and the precepts laid down by him. So in this way, practicing in this way, this is the way that the Buddha has recommended for the Sangha, and that the Sangha from ancient times, from the times that the Buddha was alive up until the present, has been able to make progress with a wide variety of situations, with a wide variety of temperaments, with a wide variety of inclinations. They've been able to make progress, and they've been able to gain the noble attainments. They've been able to strive forward for Nibbana, which is something that the Buddha set in motion 2,500 years ago, and it's something that still occurs today, even in the modern world, 2,500 years separated from his time, from his place, from the way people used to do things then. So for these reasons, one can develop this appropriate attitude towards the dhutangas, this appropriate attitude towards asceticism, this appropriate attitude towards self-denial that the Buddha taught. And one can develop this attitude of respect towards the entire Sangha as a whole, towards those who are practicing, towards the monks, the nuns, towards all those who practice and strive, which is this attitude of respect for the Sangha, because it's not so easy to tell who is and who isn't an arahant. So with an attitude of respect for the Sangha, one's mind can be at ease. And with the mind at ease, one fares on to a good destination, and one sets a foundation for further progress along the Buddha's path. Okay, so I think leave that for reflection, and hope that everybody has a great day wherever it might be, and wishing all the blessings of Dhamma practice.